अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूपा कदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकम्। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरोः श्रीयुतपदकमलं श्रीगुरून् वैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातं सहगण रघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवम् साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधा कृष्णपादान् सहगणललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च। हे कृष्ण करुणा सिन्धो दीनबन्धो जगत्पते गोपेश गोपिका कान्त राधा कान्त नमोऽस्तु ते। तप्त काञ्चन गौरांगी राधे वृन्दावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये। वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपासिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्णा हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे. This is Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, founder and Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. We've been asked this evening to speak from chapter 2, and the text is number 67. So, that verse is very simple. Kindly hear. Indriyanam hi charatam yanmano nuvidhiyate tad asya harati prajñam vayurnavam ivambhasi. That means, as a strong wind sweeps away a boat on the water, even one of the roaming senses on which the mind focuses can carry away a man's intelligence. Let's repeat these phrase by phrase. As a strong wind sweeps away a boat on the water, even one of the roaming senses on which the mind focuses can carry away a man's intelligence. There's a short purport here by Srila Prabhupada who explains, unless all the senses are engaged in the service of the Lord, even one of them engaged in sense gratification can deviate the devotee from the path of transcendental advancement. As mentioned in the life of Maharaj Ambarish, all of the senses must be engaged in Krishna consciousness, for that is the correct technique for controlling the mind. Once again, Indriyanam hicharatam yanmano anuvidhiyate tadasya harite prajñam vayurnavam ivambhasi. As a strong wind sweeps away a boat on the water, even one of the roaming senses on which the mind focuses can carry away a man's intelligence. There was one scholar who very astutely observed, well, eloquently said, that India is just like every other place in the world, but much more so. What does that mean? Traditional, as I interpret it, traditional Indian civilization is one that values the principle of focus. Focus is, we call it in Sanskrit, dhyan. To concentrate what you're doing. I think it was the Hindi poet Jai Shankar Prasad who said that it's a virtue if a man is able to keep his desires, his words, and his actions all in the same thing. Whatever we do, we have to engage our full intelligence, our full attention. Focus, to be conscious, in other words. One of the most profound things I had heard about this path of Krishna consciousness was when I first came to this path back in 1976. And Tamal Krishna Goswami, who recently departed this world, he said, before you become Krishna conscious, you have to become conscious. It's the nature of absorption and sense gratification that it robs us of our awareness. And awareness is the primary characteristic of a person who is in the mode of goodness, or the sattva guna. Those who've studied chapter 14 of the Bhagavad Gita know that there are three modes of material nature that constantly impel us into action. We get slothful, lazy, ignorant, indolent sometimes. That's called tamoguna, depressed also. We sometimes become so frenetic and so passionate that we lose our minds and can't think straight. We're so busy with desire. That's called the mode of passion, rajoguna. When we become aware and when we can therefore focus on virtue, and when we cultivate that in a very progressive manner, that's called sattvaguna. The problem is that this material world is so constructed that you never really get to keep your station in any one of these modes for very long. It's always in a state of flux. Sometimes, Krishna describes all these things in chapter 14, so you can read it. Krishna describes that sometimes rajoguna, the passion, it overwhelms sattvaguna. It overwhelms even tamoguna. Strange fits of passion, one poet wrote. I think it was Wordsworth. Strange fits of passion I have known. So, sometimes the mode of ignorance, you can't think at all, what to speak of thinking straight. You just don't think at all. You're just on autopilot, as if there's no subtle body. Subtle body has been double-clicked. It's still running, but it's not on the desktop. So, and then sometimes we cultivate goodness, and at that point we think that we're liberated. Until the planets change, or until the karma changes, or until the modes change, and then we fall. So, in this material world, no matter what station we find ourselves in, it's not the real one, and it's certainly not going to last forever. But if there's a way out of this process, it's focus. And therefore we see, I mentioned in the beginning that it's a primary characteristic of traditional Indian civilization, that is to say, Vedic civilization, that it maximizes this principle of focus in all members of society, no matter who they are. That's where, on a practical level, we hear verses such as niyatam kudu karma tvam. You just do your duty with great attention, and that will create progress. It's a fact. There are many different ways to progress in life. We've discussed this the other night for those who were here. We can focus on dharma, we can focus on artha, we can focus on kama, we can even focus on moksha. But in all cases we must focus, because that's the path of progress. And that is the principle that is assumed in the beginning of Bhakti Yoga, and on which verses like tonight's verse are indirectly based. Krishna tells us here that if one of your senses, or if the mind focuses on one of your senses that is not carefully controlled, that can be your downfall. It's very, very dangerous situation. And in case we haven't had enough experience to learn this firsthand, we probably will. But if we're more fortunate than that, then we can learn from observing others who have to undergo that difficult process, or better yet, the best thing is, for those in Sattva Guna, we hear. We just hear. It's said that the most often explained verse of the Bhagavad Gita in Srila Prabhupada's preaching history is chapter 7, text number 1. Does anybody know that verse? No students here? Krishna, it's a very important verse. He says, Maya sakta manah partha yogam yunjan mad ashraya asamshayam samagramam yathajñasasi tachrino, which means, now hear, O Sarapartha, how by practicing yoga in full consciousness of me, that's to say full awareness again, with mind attached to me, you can know me in full free from doubt. Srila Prabhupada used to emphasize the importance of this verse, not so much because of this principle of focus, but because of the importance of hearing. We have to hear first, then we know what to do. So anyway, in tonight's verse, the warning is indirectly given to us that if you allow your mind to focus, or if you allow your mind to be unengaged enough to focus on even one of your senses, it can carry you away. It's a very dangerous situation that we're in. Therefore, the primary agenda, if you will, of the Dharma Shastra in general is to keep everyone busy. Keep everyone very busy. Do your own work and be very progressive. Whatever you do in life, do not be discouraged under any circumstances. Go for it with full gusto, and may the force be with you. So, that's in the material world. But the same principle should be carried over into spiritual life. And we were discussing the other night this principle as it applies to Bhakti Yoga. It's described in the Narad Pancharatra. Saravopadhi vinirmuktam tatparatvena nirmalam. Hrishikesha sevanam. Bhakti ruchyate. Bhakti is called the process of taking our senses and engaging them or offering them into the service of that person who actually owns and controls them. We don't own our senses. Did you know that? If you can wake up in the morning, it's because of someone else's mercy upon you. Because unless the Supreme Personality of Godhead blesses you with a set of working senses and working intellect, they don't work. And I never thought that this was really such an important thing to think about until I watched, over the course of several years, I watched all of my mother's senses disintegrate and her mind disintegrate in the years just before her death, when I was her primary caregiver. You know, the memory goes, and then the eyesight goes, and you can't hear anymore, and it's a problem even to go to the bathroom, and walking is a challenge. It's a great danger. People die just from walking when you get old. Therefore, the Hindi poet wrote, Jabalagatana mein tapana vyapai tabalaga kari hari seva. As long as you can, use this good this good facility that you've been given in the human form of life for the purpose of engaging in service to Hari. So when we do that, there are some side effects that happen. When we engage with great focus and do not leave any senses unengaged, it's a great art. It's the art of all work to be able to engage oneself fully. In the modern culture where sense gratification is touted as the supreme human attainment, then, you know, it militates against this principle of focus and concentration, and therefore against progress of any sort, even in the material world, what to speak of in spiritual life, which is not even valued at all. It militates against all progress because the mind becomes splayed. Does anybody know what verse I'm thinking of here? Krishna says. And early on, it's the same chapter. He's talking about Bhogaishwarya prasaktanam tayabharata chetasam vyavasayatmaka buddhir samadhau na vidhiyate. You cannot attain samadhi if your senses are running around from this thing to that, because you cannot focus. Even to become a very successful CEO, such as Bill Gates, that man had to come very close to samadhi, to focusing all of his energies. That's the path of progress, and it's the path of progress either in the material world or in the spiritual realm. The person who allows his senses to run unbridled is the person who cannot go anywhere. Significant. The person who would do great things is the person who can control the senses. It doesn't matter what world you're in. That's a very important point. However, we've hinted already that in this short window of opportunity that we call human existence, we actually do have the opportunity to get ourselves elevated through careful focus and direction of our volition into a state of consciousness that we do not have to come back again to seek various sense objects on which to distract our attention. What's the other verse I'm thinking of? Bohushakha hinantascha buddhayo avyavasayinam. Krishna says, for the person who has not learned to appreciate this principle of self-control and focus of one's energy and attention, for that person, his intelligence is necessarily many-branched. And when your intelligence is scattered in 1,000 directions, you can't marshal the strength necessary to do anything productive. It's like a river that just, it just fans out into nothing and it disappears. So the principle of bhakti, or for that matter, the principle of anything. Look at Hiranyakashipu. How did he get into the position where even the devas were afraid of him? He was sitting on the throne of Indra, the king of heaven. There is no opulence manifest in this world that does not have a very long history of penance behind it. Penance means what? Tapasya. No pain, no gain. That's what my Sanskrit professor at UW told me. Professor Richard Solomon. God bless him. But the idea here is that if we become so influenced by the predominant work ethos and the predominant mindset of modern society, which is to display your intelligence and to allow it to roam to whatever catches your fancy, and catches more than your fancy. It catches your heart, catches your mind. Jhayato vishayan pungsam. What is the verse? Sangas teshu upajayate. You get there's some sort of connection is formed by just thinking about something too long. And sangat sanjayate kama. Where do the desires come from that impel us to do so many things that even we question ourselves? Where do those desires come from? They come from your association. What are you associating with most of the day? That's where you're going. Think about it. Therefore, the Upanishadic mantras tells us, Bhadram karnebhi shrunayama deva. You should focus you should hear only godly things, auspicious things. Your eyes you should fix on godly things. The same principle applies to all of the senses, and that's what's being described in this verse of Narad Pancharatra. Hrishikena Hrishikesha Sevanam Bhaktiruchate. To take every single one of our senses, to leave no stone unturned, to engage tad buddhayas, tad atmanas, tad nishtas, tad parayana, ityadi. Krishna says elsewhere in the Gita, to engage your faith, to engage your conviction, your intelligence, your senses, your body, your possessions, everything. Everything. That kind of attention gets us very far in spiritual life. But it requires that we do not invest our attention or our faith or our love or our time or our activities in all sorts of other things, but we have to marshal them all together and focus them in one place. What is that one place? Krishna says, me. Tad manmana bhava madbhakto madhyaji man namaskuru. Twice in Bhagavad Gita. That means it's going to be on the test. Right? When the teacher writes something on the board, and especially if it's repeated many times, it's a very, very important principle. There's a few of them. What's another one that we hear twice in Bhagavad Gita? Anyone know? Who's studying Bhagavad Gita here? It's a very good idea to read one chapter of Bhagavad Gita every day. Kam se kam, mool matra mein. Because that way, when you need this gyan, it will be there for you. And in the beginning, it's just memorization. That's fine. You can come to understand the Sanskrit later on. It's okay. Or you can study the English. In either language, it works. There's a nice verse. Murko vadati vishnaya. Namaha vishnaya. Murko vadati. Right? The uneducated person, he says Namaha Vishnaya. But a person who actually knows Sanskrit, he knows you don't say that. Namaha Krishnaya is fine, but Namaha Vishnaya doesn't work. You have to say Namo Vishnave. So Murko vadati Vishnaya, Dhiro vadati Vishnave. The person who knows, a collected scholar, he knows what to do. Ubhayos tat samam punyam bhavagrahi Janardana. But they both get the same benefit. Because Janardana is such a person. Janardana is the supreme person, in fact. But he's the kind of person who appreciates bhava. Because that's really the essence of it, isn't it? So either in English or in Sanskrit or whatever, or in Hindi, whatever is most comfortable. If we recite one chapter of Bhagavad Gita every day, it will be there when we need it. We like to repeat. Manu Smriti tells us, Dharnamo rakshati rakshitaha. Is in this way. So earlier in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna also said like this, that one should fix his mind, his intelligence, his faith, his refuge, everything. One should focus it upon me, gather it together and give it to me. Then that is the principle of bhakti. All the senses become engaged. And on the other hand, if we don't do that, it's dangerous. In chapter 18, Krishna tells us, Mat chitta sarva durgani mat prasadat tarishyasi athatse tvam ahankarad nashrosyasi vinangshyasi. That means that if you become conscious of me, again there's that word, awareness. Conscious means aware. If you become aware of me, then you will cross over all obstacles by my grace. How many obstacles? All obstacles. How many obstacles can there be in life? Just wait. You'll find out. It's coming for sure. So Krishna says when you're in a troublesome spot, and we all get there from time to time, if anybody thinks he's above this vulnerability, you will be taught that you aren't. Every CIA agent knows that if he's a human being, we can crack him. It's just a matter of how we approach it and for how long. Nobody can hold out against stress indefinitely. Don't be proud and think that I'm very advanced, I know so much, I can handle anything. It's not true. Prata prabodhito Vishnu rishikeshena yatvaya, we mentioned the other morning. The Smriti Shastra enjoins us to pray in the morning when we wake up. Thank you, Lord Vishnu, you've woken me up. Because unless he invests your senses with power, they're not going to work and you won't hear the best alarm clock. Even if you get one of those things with 2 bells and they're very loud, it doesn't work unless the senses work. Therefore, this Kena Upanishad, it addresses this question: who has invested these senses with the potency to work the way they do? Who is it that provides this mind? Where does this power come from? For the mind, for the senses, for these things. Anyway, so we want to engage our senses in this way, and if we are not careful, if we do not hear what Krishna says, then even if we're not in difficulty, but especially when we are in difficulty, we'll be finished. This is what he says. Ata chetvam ahankarat nashrosyasi. If you don't hear me and act instead out of false ego, you're finished. Vinangshyasi, you're going to be toast. That's what it means. So these are the options. It's very, very simple. We were having a discussion the other day about Bhagavad Gita, and really, if you carefully read Bhagavad Gita every day, as I've suggested, then you know that the same things are repeated over and over and over and over again in various ways, maybe not verbatim, but often they are verbatim. The other verse I was going to mention, Shreyasa dharmo viguna paradharmat sanushthitat. It's better to do your own work than to attempt to do something that is someone else's work. How do you tell the difference? That we learn from Srimad Bhagavatam. Swe adhikare yanishtha saguna parikirtata. Whatever you actually have the adhikar to do, whatever you're actually qualified to do, you should do that thing. Do not try to overshoot your qualification and attempt too much, because you're going to fail. That's someone else's duty. And do not be satisfied with doing less than you're actually qualified to do as well, because then you will also be doing someone else's duty. You have to be right on the money. And that's why we have gurus in society. They can give us the direction that we need on such a tangible, practical level. It's very nicely described in the Mahabharata. Tarko apratishtha shrutayo vibhinna na savrishir yasyamatam na bhinnam. Arguing alone about the conclusions of Dharma, it's useless. Check out the internet and you can see that. Even the Shrutis appear to contradict each other on occasion. What to speak of the greater body of writing in Sanskrit, which is the Dharma Shastras. So the real truth of religion, it's actually hidden within the heart of an unadulterated sadhu, a pure devotee, a mahajana. Dharmasya tatvasya nihitam guhayam. Mahajano yena gata sapantha. Whatever path the mahajana has walked, you have to follow that path. Don't concoct. This is another thing that Srila Prabhupada called the American disease. They always want to change everything. Not satisfied with leaving anything the way it is. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, they say. Or old is gold is another one. There's an extreme conservatism that pervades traditional Vedic culture. Why is that? Because it's actually endorsed in the Shastra directly, explicitly. I mentioned the other day that those who weren't here maybe didn't hear, but when I was in college we learned that around Kurukshetra in the Punjab area, the archaeologists have found from 3,000 or 4,000 years ago shards of pottery in the shape of these, these plates that we still use, steel plates and katori and lota, and the culture from 3,000 or 4,000 years ago has retained these things. That is called cultural continuity. Or as Krishna calls it in chapter 3 of the Bhagavad Gita, loka sangraha, to keep the society together. And the chudiyan that women wear, those things also. 3,000-4,000 years ago they were doing this. That kind of conservatism is what I'm talking about. Because Manusmriti warns us that you have to follow the path that your forefathers and their ancestors tread. If you always do that, you will not run into any problem, because it's very tricky. He also says that if you mutilate or efface or harm dharma, it will efface, mutilate, and harm you. That's the flip side of the coin. In exactly the same way that if we focus our attention and give it to Krishna, then he will carry us across all obstacles. And if we don't do that, then he's going to hand us over to Maya, and she's going to beat the daylights out of us. And that happens. So these are the things. So Srila Prabhupada writes here in his purport, as I've already read, but I'll repeat it because it bears repeating, that unless all the senses are engaged in the service of the Lord, even one of them engaged in sense gratification can deviate the devotee from the path of transcendental advancement. I've already mentioned that it can deviate you even from the path of material advancement, if that's the best thing that you can conceive of as a worthwhile goal in life. But for those who are able to see further than that, those who value transcendental cultivation, for those persons also, all of the senses have to be engaged. And this is where Bhakti Yoga shines supreme. Because there is no other process of yoga that so fully indicates, or so fully engages all of the senses. At least there's not such a process of yoga that takes us out of the suffering of samsara. Because consider, even if you have a Class A prison cell, even if you're in Club Fed, as they call it, you're still in prison. It's still you have had your independence curtailed, and it's an artificial stasis that's not comfortable. Even if the bed is comfortable, even if you have all facilities, there are such prisons. And, this material existence, and even in the best circumstances in this material world, you have to die. You have to be reborn. You get sick. That's ugly and it's painful. I realized this when I was with my mother as well. What is old age? It's like getting sick, except that you don't get well again. It's like having the flu and you don't get better. Everybody knows what the flu feels like. It's very painful. And, when we get old, it's just like that, but you don't get better. It's not nice. And then you have to die. So this is called pa-pa-ba-ba-ma, those who know the alphabet. Pa-varga, the word in Sanskrit, pa-varga means material existence. Pa, standing, it's an acronym, if you will, standing for parishram. How hard are you working so hard? There's phena, foam at the mouth, right? What does ba stand for? I don't remember now, but... Yeah, hard work, you're foaming at the mouth, nothing is very sure, therefore bhaya, you're afraid, that's bha. And finally ma, what is that? Maranam. The whole silly process is crowned with death. There's got to be a better way. An intelligent person should question like this. So, parikshya lokan karnamichitan brahmano niravedam ayan nastya krita kratena. Mundaka Upanishad tells us. The intelligent person, the brahmana, he surveys all possible projects in life, and he comes to the conclusion, wait a minute, everything here is karma. Whatever I would do, no matter what path I take, it's going to produce more karma. So I've already got karma. What's the point of adding more karma to karma? At that point, a person considers atato brahma jignasa. This is the beginning of the Chatusutri. Chatusutri means the first four of the Vedanta Sutra aphorisms. Very famous segment emphasized by commentators. So that is atato brahma jignasa, means here, now, that you have a working mind and body, and you're in the human form which is meant for dharma and moksha. Use this thing and inquire what's absolutely true beyond the relativities of my karma and my, ever-shifting modes and all these things that are... material existence is characterized by change. Whereas reality is characterized by what? What's the word for it? Antonym of change. Permanence, I guess you can say. Na sato vidyate bhavo na bhavo vidyate sata ubhayorapi drishtom tas tvanayos tattvadarshiphi. The seers of the truth have given us this definition. What's real and what's not real? Real means you don't lose it. Unreal means you can't keep it, period. It's that simple. So this science of Krishna consciousness transcends the world of karma. And karma yoga engages you fully, but it doesn't take you out of the suffering. That's the point. You're fully engaged, and you can even make progress, but no matter how high you go, you have to fall down again, because what goes up must come down. Shakespeare put it very eloquently when he said, "There's many a slip twixt the cup and the lip." Those who are studying the Srimad Bhagavatam, they know the story of Maharaj Nriga. He was a very pious householder, more than anyone in this room. He was pious. And he gave hundreds of cows in charity to the Brahmins. But somehow or other, by some strange quirk of fate, one Brahmin's cow, a cow he had given to a Brahmin, wandered back into the king's own herd, and he gave it a second time to another Brahmin. Somehow it was revealed, and the two Brahmins were they were intransigent. Both of them wanted the cow. What's he supposed to do? He had to give it to one, and the other one cursed him. Through no fault, apparently, of his own. That's the way it is in this world. You know, someone once told me, an attorney once told me, and they know these things, there is no good deed in this world that goes unpunished. So the karma marg is fine in terms of its capacity to engage us fully. It's great, but you know what's the result? It's not really that high. On the other hand, those who have come to this stage that the Mundaka Upanishad describes, seeing that there's nothing here but karma, they get a little bit detached, and they think, well, you know, let me figure out what's absolutely true beyond all this relativity. Tad vijnanartham. In order to understand that, tad vijnanartham gurum evabhigachet. One has to go to the guru, and how do you approach a guru? Samitpani, with firewood in hand. In the old days, the munis used to live in the ashram, and they were constantly offering yajnas, so they were constantly in need of firewood. So the disciples would bring the firewood. Nowadays, we don't understand that knowledge comes through mercy. When I was in college, my thesis advisor told me, you know, if you really want to tackle your subject, ... I mean, from that point on, I kind of lost interest, because it doesn't work like that. Knowledge, it's not just a matter of securing data by dint of your good karma. It's also a process of being blessed. You cannot be happy in this world without the blessings of superiors. I think people know that. That's what motivates most of them to come here. But the principle here is that when we try to understand what is absolute truth, what is spiritual reality, what won't change or won't be lost, what's eternal, what's permanent, what's real, to understand that thing, you have to go to the Guru, the Upanishad tells us. And you have to learn, because it's a science. It's a definite process. It's been outlined in exhaustive detail. You can learn these things. We teach these classes here. So, on the platform of transcendence or gyan, you have full awareness of everything, but you've got no way to engage that awareness. Because as soon as you become active, it's no longer gyan, isn't it? Pure theory does not exist in this material world. As soon as you apply it, it's no longer pure theory. It's mixed with a little bit of application as well, right? So gyan is great, and you can remain in a kind of a suspended animation, liberated state with the awareness of the nature of spirit, and by fully identifying with that spirit, but you cannot stay in that stasis forever. It's artificial. Only Bhakti Yoga offers us a way to fully engage all of our senses and keep ourselves completely busy in this, completely absorbed on the transcendental platform of knowledge without generating further karma. Therefore, in chapter 3, Krishna says, one should know very well what is karma, what is vikarma, and what is akarma. Karma means dharma, pious activity. Vikarma means papa, impious activity. And akarma means only bhakti. Only bhakti. It's the only thing that can be akarma, because you're not inactive even for a second, Krishna says. You cannot sit still. The mind is like a child. Is it not? Today I took a walk with my hosts with 2 children. One of them is bad enough, but when you get 2 of them together, it's like 2 television sets going at full blast at the same time. I mean, the mind is like that. Therefore, let's look at the etymology again. I mentioned earlier, I often mention, dharma comes from the dri dhatu, from the verbal root dri, which means to sustain, to bear. It has a connection integrally with that which is not lost, with that eternal realm that we're trying to tap into. Therefore, it means the intrinsic property of a thing as well, the intrinsic property of the soul. It's called Jaiva Dharma, or Sanatan Dharma. Now, the Shastra also, because we know what to do and what not to do on the basis of Dharma Shastra. So what is the dhatu of Shastra? Shasdhatu. Shasdhatu means to what? To beat. With the mind, you don't try to convince the mind because the mind does not have the capacity to be convinced. Just as a child doesn't have the capacity for reason, a young child. You cannot reason with them. Therefore, the Dharma Shastra makes no attempt whatsoever to explain what the injunctions are. Only when we come in contact with the default mindset of the highly consequentialist Western civilization, then we start to challenge everything and ask why? Why do we do this? Why do we do that? What's the reason for that? What's the result of that? We want to know everything. Dharma Shastra doesn't tell us because we're in a perverse mindset. It's the wrong mindset. Children do not have the capacity to understand why they're told to do the things that they're doing. When they grow up, then it's another matter. So similarly, when we grow up spiritually, when we actually are able to sustain our spiritual awareness, to return to that initial word that we emphasized, and when we do so by constantly engaging our senses without fail, that's called in chapter 14, Mam cha yo vyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate sagunan samatityaitan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. When we can push through whatever the mode of the moment is, sometimes passion, sometimes goodness, sometimes ignorance, when we push through with the agenda of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, represented especially as in the instructions of the spiritual master, that elevates us out of the influence of these lower modes altogether. We come to the practical stage of spiritual liberation, which is called Brahmabhuta. And Brahmabhuta prasannatma na shochiti na kankshiti samasarveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktim labhate param, Krishna says. When we're on that Brahmabhuta stage of liberation, there are some symptoms. We don't envy anyone any longer. We don't whine about our problems any longer. And we can see all living beings equally because of that. Until those 2 corners are taken care of, we're going to see people unequally. We cannot see people equally. When our vision is spiritual, then we can see equally because it's the only platform on which equality exists. And Krishna says on that platform one gets real bhakti, param bhakti. This devotional service is a highly elevated science. It's effected on the platform of liberation. That liberation is fomented through punya karma, pious activity, which results in knowledge, the perfection of which is bhakti. These things are all very clearly corroborated in the Bhagavad Gita. And the beauty of the bhakti process, as I mentioned, is that it fully engages all the senses. You want to see beautiful form? You look at Sri Sri Radha Nila Madhava in their wonderful new temple. Sri Sri Radha Nila Madhava ki. You want to taste with your tongue something nice? You taste prasadam that has been offered to the deity. You can do this at home. You can worship Krishna at home, even if only in a picture, that's okay, fine. You can offer whatever, yad karoshi, yad ashnasi, yad juhoshi, dadasi, yad yapasyasi kaunteya. Tat kurushamad arpanam. Krishna tells us this. Whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you sacrifice, adi adi adi, You do that as an offering unto me. We were also discussing this the other day. With regards to the karma kandya rituals that we all undergo from time to time, as a matter of samskar and whatnot, at the end of all of them, what does the Pandit say? Shri Krishna Arpanamastu. Is it not? Shri Krishna Arpanamastu. May this be an offering to Lord Krishna. So this is the point. Bhakti can fully facilitate this process. Many, many times people, I've heard, they ask this question, that, how can we have a spiritual life and still remain, productive and active in the material world? Only bhakti can really help you to do that. Because if you stay on the karma platform, you're not going to have a spiritual life. Therefore, sometimes just to shock people into this awareness, sometimes I make a distinction sometimes between spiritual Hinduism and mundane Hinduism. If you go to a place like Mauritius, where it's mainly Devata Puja and hardly any concern for transcendence, it's practically material Hinduism. It does not get out of the Trigunya stage of existence. And that Trigunya stage means mundane, temporary. So, bhakti affords us a chance to remain active, to remain, to engage all the assets and all the tendencies, the desires for society, friendship, love, activity, variety, all these things, bhakti yoga fully accommodates, and nothing else can do that. Karma fully accommodates it, but it's not spiritual. Jnana elevates you completely out of this world, but there's nothing to do, because it's only jnana. But bhakti mixes the two in this way. And therefore Krishna says, or the Narad Pancharatra says, Saravopadhi vinirmuktam tatparatvena nirmalam. This is the first half of the verse. By Hrishikena Hrishikesha Sevanam, then two things happen. We become freed from all the upadhis, all the false designations. I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm a human, I'm a demigod, I'm a child, I'm whatever I think I am. Those designations all go away, and I realize I'm actually aham brahmasmi, I'm spiritual. I'm a particle of consciousness. I'm moving throughout this material world, body after body, life after life after life. Where's the end to it? One gets this glimpse. That's one effect of performing bhakti. And the other one, tatparadvena nirmalam. We become as pure as the Supreme Lord. That doesn't mean we become the Supreme Lord. It doesn't mean we even get anywhere close to being able to compete with the Supreme Lord. So don't get any bright ideas. What it means is that we're elevated to the same transcendental level on which all of his activities exist, which explains why he tells us later on in chapter 4, Janma karma cha me divyam. All my appearance, my activities, they're all transcendental. And if one knows this, in fact, then that person also becomes transcendental. He doesn't have to come back to this material world in his next life, Arjun. Instead, he comes to me. Naiti mameti. This is the idea. So how do we know Krishna in fact? How do we practice this bhakti process very nicely? I mentioned already, we approach a spiritual master, bona fide spiritual master who can teach us the purport, the Shastra Siddhanta, as we say. And what's he going to tell us? He's going to tell us that bhaktyam am abhijanati yavanyaschasmi tatvataham, as Krishna says. The tatvata that he mentions in chapter 4 that allows you to get out of this material world and understand his transcendental nature and appearance and activities, that knowledge, tatvata, in fact, it will allow you to understand him. And it's effected through bhakti, through love. You give whatever you can to Krishna, voluntarily and selflessly, without any desire to exploit him or his things, without any desire to escape him or his representatives. Just give selflessly to Krishna. How many people come here and pray to Krishna? Raise your hands if you pray to Krishna. Everybody's shy, but some are raising their hands. Now, how many people come and pray to Krishna, not for anything for themselves, but just, Krishna, I love you, please tell me what I can do for you? Not so many hands. A few. We're working on it. See? But this is bhakti. The more we enter into this spirit, then the more we actually manifest this spiritual awareness that we're talking about this evening. I live in Vrindavan. Every once in a while I have to go to the foreign registration office at the central police station in Mathura just to do my visa work. And whenever I'm in Mathura, I make a point to visit Sri Krishna Janmasthan, Janmabhoomi. There's a big, nice, beautiful mandir there. How many people have been to Krishna's Janmasthan? Jai Ho, Sri Krishna Bhagavan Ki Jai. You may have noticed the shloka from Srimad Bhagavatam written on the wall just above the main doorway to the temple. Does anyone know that verse? It says, Swasti astu vishvasya khala prasidatam dhyayantu bhutani shivam mithodhiya manascha bhadram bhajatadadhokshaje aveshyatam no matirapyahaituki. What does that mean? This is spoken by Prahlad Maharaj, the 5-year-old devotee of Lord Narasimhadev, pure devotee. He said, may there be all auspiciousness for the whole universe. What 5-year-old thinks on this level? May there be all auspiciousness. May all the envious living beings, the demons, may they all be pacified. Dhyayantu bhutani shivam mithodhiya. May we always meditate in this way, because in that way we can think of each other's welfare instead of thinking of how to hurt each other or how to exploit each other. Everybody in this material world, there was one Chinese revolutionary, his name was Lu Xun. The communists adopted him as, political agenda mongers generally do. But he wrote a book about cannibalism because it was his experience. Cannibalism is, in case you know anything about Far East Asian culture, it's not something that's really that unknown to that culture. It comes up every once in a while throughout its long history. But more than just literally speaking, he felt that everybody that I'm looking at in this world, it's like they're trying to eat me with a knife and fork. You ever feel that way? It is like that many times. That's the general spirit and ethos that dominates in this material world. It's not a very nice place in that respect. So he says instead, how do we come to think of each other's welfare? How can we pray for the pacification of all the envious demons? How can we think of the universal welfare? By worship of the transcendental Lord, the Lord who is beyond our senses. By worshiping Him, he says, may we enter into this consciousness more and more and more. May we deeply enter into this mood. And may we do so ahaituki, without any selfish desire whatsoever. Such a profound and beautiful prayer he makes. It's really something to meditate. I would think that that's why, Pandit Madan Mohan Malaviya and others who built that Sri Krishna Janmasthan Mandir, they saw fit to put that verse up there, just to make the more educated of us think about it. So anyway, these are just a few things we can think about. Keep your senses engaged in Krishna's service, and you can do that most easily by the simple process that requires only a tongue and even one ear, but 2 ears is better. That is chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Generally, we would like to enlist the help of a spiritual master to really enter deeply into this easy process, because although it's very easy, it's very difficult. It's easy in the sense that it's simple, but it's difficult in the sense that we're so entangled by our infected minds and hearts and even intelligence also, because these things are the sitting places of lust, that they create confusion for us. So we generally can take the help of a pure devotee, and if not the help, then at least we need the blessings, because we've already mentioned kripa, Guru Kripa bina nahi koi sadhan bal. One Brij Pasha pad goes. So I'll stop here. Does anybody have any questions or comments about any of these things? So I know we covered a lot of ground. The principle is to keep our senses engaged because it's dangerous. If you're not very careful to keep your senses engaged in Krishna's service, Maya's there just waiting upon his order to teach you that you probably should. Koi prashna hai kya? Yes. Nitya Gauranga Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Thank you for the wonderful class. Prabhu, you said that if you are doing more than what your capacity is or something, that you are not doing your dharma, or if you are doing less than what you are required or supposed to do, you're not doing dharma.
That's right.
How do you identify that?
You don't. Your spiritual master does. Now here's another thing. The question is, how do you identify what you're qualified for so that you don't, overestimate your capacity and don't settle for less than you're qualified? Generally, this is done by our gurus, gurujanas, and that in the widest sense of the term. It includes our parents, it includes our spiritual masters. The tremendous social support that we get from the traditional Varnashram society is so beautiful that all these things are already in place, and you don't really have to search. One of the many insidious effects of the scientific revolution of Europe about 200 years ago is not only that we are now socialized in such a way that by default we enter into everything, every situation with profit and loss calculation, but we also demand to know why, as I mentioned already. And that's really not a very healthy thing. In traditional Varnashram society, it's not necessary to go through that process of, introspection, and people become neurotic, or worse than neurotic, they're so full of self-esteem that they never even question their existence, no matter how pathetic it becomes. That's another problem. But, if we just leave things the way they are, as Manu had said, they do work. Because that is the nature. Dharma simply means that which sustains you. If it doesn't sustain you, it's not dharma. It's paradharma, or it's upadharma, or it's chaladharma, or there's about 5 or 6 pseudo-dharmas that the Srimad Bhagavatam details for us, so that we can recognize when I'm doing something wrong. So, in general, one has to accept the guidance of these superiors. That means not only one's immediate superiors, but our predecessors from the past. One of the 5 Pancha Mahayajnas that are enjoined upon all human beings to perform every day is that we have to recognize the debt that we owe to our ancestors and the Pitris as well as the sages, because we're using so much knowledge they have given us and we don't realize it. We're not appreciative. We're not even aware to return to that word for a third time. So, is that okay? It helps answer that. बिजली नहीं आई. Yeah, just loudly and I'll repeat your question. Yeah. Now that's a wonderful question. Tell me in one sentence how I'm going to repeat it. Because people can't hear you. It's a little subtle, I know. First of all, let me speak on this one thing, that we have only to hear from the spiritual master without necessarily asking why all the time. Let me qualify this, because we do not accept a spiritual master until we're positive that we can do that with absolute confidence. You see the point? until we accept a spiritual master, we not only should question, we should be highly skeptical until we accept someone as a spiritual master. But once we are actually convinced this person is an absolute authority, then questioning stops, and all you have to do is follow. You just have to listen. That's a very, very important point, and it's lost in the modern academic setting. It's lost because the whole foundation is one of ascending, or avaroha, or aroha panth rather than avaroha panth. Our knowledge is descending. It's not something we're ascending to. It's something that's coming down to us. So one really once you accept a spiritual master after mature deliberation and education and, even, I don't want to say challenging, but, pointed questions as need be. One should not surrender blindly to anything. That's not the best use of the human intelligence. It's a misuse. And you will find out if you do it. But once one has accepted, one only has to hear. And I think the second part of your question is that, the faith is that, when I mentioned that Guru Kripa Bina Nahi Koi Sadhan Bal, that means that along with the instructions that were given by the spiritual master, even if it seems impossible to me, we have to understand or place our faith in the principle that if we endeavor, and all we have to do is endeavor, siddhya siddhyo samobhutva yoga uchyate, Krishna says, samadvam yoga uchyate. If we just endeavor without considering happiness, distress, loss, victory, whatever, success or failure, we don't consider. If we just make the endeavor to follow that instruction with our all, that's all we have to do, and the mercy descends upon us. And generally we become empowered to do things that we cannot do. Otherwise, how does it happen? Where is the example? What is the application of Krishna's promise that if you do this, I will supply what you lack, I will preserve what you have? Anybody know the verse? What is that? Life Assurance Company of India? Yoga Kshemam Vahamyaham. This is the idea. Ananyash chintayanto mam ye janaha paryupasate tesham nityabhiyuktanam. When they're constantly engaged like this with faith, yoga kshemam vahami. I carry them where they cannot go. And I will preserve whatever assets they have. They will not lose it. Krishna promises this, and therefore his representative, if he is a representative, and that's what you have to check out before you accept him as a guru, you have to know he's really transparent, in the sense that he's a transparent via media, a conduit of that mercy. Then it comes the same way. Let me give you an example from 1974. Srila Prabhupada wanted to get his Chaitanya Charitamrita edition out. It is in 17 volumes. And he wanted to get this done very fast. So he told his disciples, do this within, a month, 2 months? I don't remember. The disciple in charge of the BBT at that time said, Prabhupada, that's impossible. Prabhupada stopped, turned around, looked him straight in the eye and said, impossible is a word in a fool's dictionary. This gets back to the principle of focus that we discussed earlier. You have to collect your assets, you've got to focus your attention, and you've got to really work hard. And Krishna will bless you. And that's exactly what happened. The entire community was galvanized into action because of their faith in that instruction. And they got 17 volumes. You know the way that Prabhupada does his books. It's very exhaustive treatment. 17 volumes were done in, I think it was 2 months. Maybe even 1 month. It's a superhuman attainment. One Catholic priest went to this Mother Teresa in Kolkata, that Albanian nun. And he wasn't very sure of himself because he'd been given an assignment within that institution that he didn't feel qualified to do. She looked at him with the calmness of her wisdom and said, God is very humble. He doesn't like to take the credit. And therefore he gives he gives a task to the persons who are most unqualified. He gives his own work to the person who's the most unqualified, because unless that person does it, no one will ever believe that it was God's work. Did we see this happen with Srila Prabhupada? At age 70, I've already told you about my experience with my mother, who was about that age. Srila Prabhupada came to America on a steamship. What to speak of seasickness? He had 2 heart attacks on the way. He had no money. He had a few trunks of Srimad Bhagavatams, a bag of suji, and about 40 rupees. And in 1965, what do you think 40 rupees was worth? He didn't know whether to turn right or left when he got off the boat. In a helpless, hopeless way, armed with nothing but faith in his guru's order, he started this institution, which has now spread all over the world, and hundreds of thousands of members. And it's spreading so fast in India, you can't believe. They cannot even document all the new temples that are opening up left, right, and center. It's so fast. In Delhi alone, they've got 14. They're not even in the Back to Godhead magazine because you can't list them all. And it's like that in many, many places also. Because he had this faith. Bharate bhumite hoilo manushya janmajar janmasartha kori karo paropakar. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ne kaha ki. That whoever is born in India, you take this mission, you become Krishna conscious first. That's an important prerequisite. If you don't have it, you can't share it. So first become aware, then become aware of Krishna, then share that awareness with others. And after having done that, then you can actually serve humanity. This is the mission of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And Prabhupada said that Mahaprabhu gave this instruction to every Indian. He said, I'm only one Indian. I've tried to take it a little bit seriously. If every Indian takes this seriously, what will happen? Now we see it happening. Instilled by the faith that was ignited by Prabhupada's own example, against all the odds. He had everything working against him. And then finally, when he found a place in New York City, after sitting down underneath a tree and chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Some few people came forward. They were impressed at his integrity, at his purity, at his wisdom, at the profundity of this process. And they decided to join. Hote, it became a big institution that you see now. Because it's very, very contagious, this pure bhakti, because it's intrinsic within us all. It just has to be awakened a little bit. And what awakens it? Sadhu Sangha, Sarva Shastra Koi, Lava Matra Sadhu Sangha, Sarva Siddhi Hoy. Just by associating with devotees, Sarva Siddhi Hoy, you will get all perfection. That's the wonderful jewel that Prabhupada has created for us. So many devotees to associate with, because even Tulsidas knows, Bina satsanga na hari katha, bina moha na bhagat, right? Moha gai binu rama padoi hoy na drin anuraga. There's no question of Hari Katha without sadhu sangha, and that without Hari Katha, without your illusion dispelled through that process, there's no firm devotion for the lotus feet of Ram. Satam prasangan mama virya samvido bhavanti hrit karna rasayana katha. Srimad Bhagavatam says the same thing. Tad joshnad ashu upavarga vartmani shraddhara tir bhaktirana karmashyati. This is the science of bhakti yoga in a nutshell. That verse has been picked apart and expanded into about 10 different stages of our advancement in bhakti, how we do so. But it begins with hearing and good association. Suhrit Satam, for the honest person, for the sincere and progressive person who's willing to actually do something after hearing what to do, then for that person, everything inauspicious within the heart is gradually washed away. I'm kind of rambling now, sorry. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Sorry to take a little bit of time here, but hopefully it's of some help. And thank you very, very much for the opportunity to speak here today. I'm very much obliged, and it's a great honor. And I also wanted to offer respectful obeisances to our august temple president and fearless leader, Harivilas Prabhu, who's very foresightful, ingenious mind, has figured out how to spread Krishna consciousness in so many successful ways here in the Northwest. It's a great inspiration, and we're all grateful. So thank you very much, and all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine. Shiva Jaya Jaya Gaura Chande Aratika Shobha Janhavi Takavane Jagamana Lobha Ivadakhine Nidai Chan Vame Gadadhar Nikate Advaita Srinivas Chhatradhar Boshi achen Gaurachan Ratna Singhasane Arati Karen Brahma Adi Deva Gane Narahari Adi Kari Chamar Hula Sanjaya Mukunda Basu Ghoshadiga घंटा बाजे बाजे करताल मधुरा मृदंग बाजे परमर शाल বাজে ঘন্টা বাজে মধুর 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 বাজে শঙ্খ বাজে ঘন্টা বাজে মধুর 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 বাজে মাধুর 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 বাজে মাধুর 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 বাজে মাধুর 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 বাজে মাধুর 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 বাজে আই গৌর হরি বল হরি বল হরি বল হরি বল আই গৌর হরি বল হরি বল হরি বল হরি বল বহু কোটি চন্দ্র যিনি বদন উজ্জ্বল মালা দেশে বানমালা ঘরে ঝালা মালা শিব শিব শুক নারদ প্রেমে গদগাদ ভকতি বিনোদ দেখে গৌরার সম্পদ শিব জয় জয় গৌর চাঁদের আরতি শোভা বানে জগমন লোভা হে জগ জান মান লোভা হে জগ জান মান লোভা শোভা জগা জান মান লোভা গৌরাঙ্গের আরতি শোভা জগ জান মান লোভা জগ জান মান লোভা জগ জান মান লোভা গৌরাঙ্গের আরতি শোভা জগ জান মান লোভা হরি বল হরি বল হরি বল হরি বল গীতায় গৌর হরি বল হরি বল হরি বল হরি বল Namo Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare Oh Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Gaur Hari Bol Jai Gaur Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Jai Gaur Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Hare Jai Nama Krishna Yadavaya Namah Hari Haraye Nama Krishna Yadavaya Namah Yadavaya Madhavaya Keshavaya Namah Yadavaya Madhavaya Keshavaya Namah Gopal Govinda Ram Sri Madhusudan Gopal Govinda Ram Sri Madhusudan Giridhari Gopinath Madana Mohan Giridhari Gopinath Madana Mohan Oh Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare Hare Ram Ram Hare Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Param Sojigacharya Stottarishata Shishiman Shila Vaishnava Bhakti Vranta Sahara Shila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Nama Acharya Shila Thakur Haridas Ki Jai Prem se kaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shyam Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Navadip Mayapur Dham Ki Jai Ganga Devi Ki Jai Yamuna Mai Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Tulasi Rani Ki Jai Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Harinama Sankirtana Ki Jai Gruntaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai ISKCON DVT founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Shri Gaurnitai Ki Jai Shri Jagannath Balaram Subhadra Devi Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Nila Madhava Ki Jai Bala Gopal Ki Jai Narasingha Dev Ki Jai Shaligram Bhagavan Ki Jai Shri Sita Ram Hanuman Lakshman Ki Jai Tulsi Rani Ki Jai Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Go Premanandi. All glories to the Assembled devotees. All glories to the Assembled devotees. All glories to the Assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga. Jai Shri Prabhupada.
Hare